welcome to the first of a series of webinars produced as part of a pilot project under the banner of the Office for Data Analytics, or ODA. More will be explained about the ODA in a bit by James Cokham of the University of Sheffield, but I'm John Guest. I work at the Combined Authority for South Yorkshire. I work in the policy team. I just wanted to run through a few things ahead of kicking this off. So the first thing is, and there was a slight delay in me speaking, and that's because this webinar is being recorded. If you're uncomfortable with that, please turn off your cameras or leave the call. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is the structure. So the structure is that James and I will provide an introduction. We'll then hand over to the academic team, to Jesse, Vanya and Enrico, to talk through the work. We'll also then have a question and answer session at the end, comments and feedback to sort of wrap that up. The last thing that I wanted to say is this webinar is focused upon innovation. I won't go into exactly what innovation is, because that could lead us down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but innovation in its broader sense is important to policy and to the Combined Authority across all of its teams. Innovation in its broader sense really is, so innovation in delivery, in policy design, in engagement, technology and economic growth. So why is innovation important to Combined Authority? Well, I suppose sort of one of the major benefits of innovation is that contribution to economic growth, and really about how innovation can drive higher productivity. As productivity rises, more goods, services are produced, and in other words, the economy grows. And for that reason, innovation is a central principle of the strategic economic plan. And that document highlights for South Yorkshire that innovation has a transformative effect on the economy. In every economy around the world, the most innovative firms and industries are also the most productive. So South Yorkshire is seeking to accelerate the intensity of innovation activities in order to drive economic development. And to do that, we need a better understanding of what innovation is happening within South Yorkshire, and data and deep understanding and analysis of that is a requirement really. But data on innovation is hard to come by, and it's also patchy. So we've been working with the University of Sheffield through the Office for Data Analytics to rectify this. And at this point, I'll hand over to James, and he'll tell you a little bit more about the ODA.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. As John said, I'm James Cokham. I'm Economic Development Manager at the University of Sheffield. I'm very much a warm-up act for my academic colleagues who are the main event today, but I'm just going to give a little bit of context on the ODA and the pilot that we've been working on with South Yorkshire MCA colleagues. So if we just switch slides, please, Vanya. Thank you. I guess just to put it in context, the ODA is part of a much wider programme of work on behalf of the university, and that's something called the Made Together programme, and that is pretty much the university's commitment to South Yorkshire. It's a structured, financed programme of work that seeks to use the university's intellectual innovation assets to, I guess, concentrate impact across a number of themes, which you can see on your screen. The top four are, I guess, more thematic in that they're focused on productivity, health, cultural vibrancy, and sustainable development and net zero. But we've also got a programme of work looking at more cross-cutting themes, such as developing infrastructure, talent development, community engagement, and being a trusted civic partner. So I think it's just important to say this is part of a much wider series of work. Just skip again, please, Vanya. So what exactly is the ODA pilot and why are we doing it? This piece of work, actually, its initial gestation was in discussions between the previous Mayor of South Yorkshire, Dan Jarvis, and our Vice Chancellor, Kern Lamberts, and a lot of work, I guess, with academics and policymakers, looking at a lack of data, which John touched on in an innovation context, to actually build strong evidence-based decision-making and policy-making around. So sort of Kern and Dan and sort of colleagues working across a partnership across South Yorkshire had sort of looked at ways, how can the university actually support stronger and more focused evidence-based decision-making and policy-making? And that was the sort of start, that was the challenge, that was the problem we were trying to find a solution to. So skip again, please, Vanya. Thank you. And from those initial discussions came the idea of a regional office for data analytics. The programme has been directed and co-funded by the South Yorkshire MCA and the university, but it's a broad house. It intends to involve much wider partners. And the idea has been to build on the data and the expertise and the analytical capability and capacity that we have at the university, and use that to produce data and produce insights that enable much more detailed and much more granular policy responses and democratic decision making. We know, although we're operating in a very quickly changing and unpredictable policy context, and that's unpredictable within the a pretty challenging time of the last 10 years, but we know that data and much stronger forecasting and monitoring of impact is going to be crucial in unlocking future government funding and in terms of regional policy making. So that's what the pilot was trying to explore. And we're also looking at how data could be shared more coherently and how enhanced analytics and specialist insight could support partners across South Yorkshire. Next slide, please, Vanya. Thank you. And as part of that, the pilots consisted of 5 demonstrator projects. All of these projects have been built around areas where MCA and wider public sector colleagues operating across South Yorkshire felt that data was either scant or non-existent to actually build policy and strategy around. The first of those, which we're discussing today, is innovation, but the pilots also funded projects looking at household financial resilience and fragility, which we started this earlier this year. That's only become obviously more important and more apparent as the years progressed. Digital poverty, hydrogen conversion, and regional emissions budgeting. So the ODA pilot has funded academics specialising in those areas to look at, analyse and present the data in an accessible way to policymakers from which to build future policy, strategy and decision making. The outputs have made that possible. We've produced data visualizations, reports and policy briefings. We're running webinars, the first of which is today. All of it will be hosted on a pilot website, which we'll be sharing the address of at the end of this webinar. And we've also talked to a lot of people around how an ODA and the potential benefits of an ODA could best be developed. And that's about making the case for future funding to actually build on this pilot and deliver more important and in-depth impact. So like John said at the start, we're running webinars on the other projects you can see on your screen. So please do put that date in your diaries. And I'll hand over to my academic colleagues now, and Vanya to start with, to tell you a little bit more about this really exciting innovation project.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, James. Thanks, John. John, for organizing and for introducing the project itself and why innovation is important. And thanks, James, for talking about the ODA and the positioning of the work that Enrico, Jess, and I have conducted in the context of the ODA. So, as John said, innovation matters. Innovation is important in the long term for economic growth, but is innovation important and crucially does not happen in isolation. So innovation happens when people talk about potential new product, talk about new opportunities that the market offers, when they talk about and exchange ideas about things that may improve the way processes are conducted into a firm. So because the innovation does not happen in isolation, it's important that we look at innovation at a regional level. And as mentioned briefly by John at the beginning, the purpose of this work was just to look at the local innovation system in South Yorkshire and understanding what are its defining features. And the reason why we thought it is important to do so is because we do know how innovation works in some part of our regions. We know how it works in some industries, but we never looked at the region as a whole and its capabilities to produce innovation. So to be able to do so, we started using the concept of local innovation system, which has a certain amount of academic pedigree, was introduced in 1992 by regional economist called Cook. And what we did was simply to look at the way the local innovation systems are defined in the literature to understand whether they can give us a way to capture what is happening in South Yorkshire. So, first of all, I have to introduce, I think this is fair, let me do the academic job. I have to introduce what is the concept of local innovation system. So a local innovation system is a localized network of economic agents that are involved in the production, use, and diffusion of innovation. Now, local innovation systems matter because they provide the cornerstone of the much bigger and broader national innovation system, which as a whole identifies where are the strengths of a nation in terms of innovation and economic performance. Now, because the concept has been around for a while, we do have some literature that tell us what matters in the context of the local innovation system. And we know that links among companies, third sector organization, policy institution, and research institutions matter, but these links, they have to be strong, they have to be effectively embedded into the fabric, in the economic fabric of the region. What is really important is that we do have a strong pool of skilled workers that can support the demand of these emerging industries. And a third aspect that matters is the characteristics of the knowledge base that has to be sufficiently diversified in the sense that we do need to have a good mix of theoretical and applied knowledge across different research fields. So, when we have started to look at the local innovation system in South Yorkshire, of course, we had to make some choices. We couldn't analyze everything, but we had to identify some key features of the innovation system that in some sense matter to give us a story of what is happening in South Yorkshire. So what we started with was the concept of embeddedness, and we look at embeddedness in two ways. In the first, at the beginning, we have looked at the way innovators work among themselves within the region, and then we have looked at the links of the South Yorkshire innovators with other innovation systems in the country. And we have used two key indicators: the number of collaborative R&D projects led by South Yorkshire innovators and the range of project partners. We have then looked at the working of the labor market, and we have looked in particular demand and supply of labor in innovative industries, and we have focused as indicators on the share of job postings and workers in these industries. Finally, last but not the least, we are focused on the innovation outputs and their quality. And clearly here, we do not have a vast range of indicators that we can use. And so we are focused on the patents. We are focused on citations of these patents that can be backward and forward. And we have calculated a number of indicators of the quality of the patents. Now, it is important to notice that patents are not only about the actual technological innovation that is patented, which is usually it's the way they are considered. Patents matter because they are a way to codify knowledge. So basically, once a technology has been patented, there is it's a mechanism to let this knowledge about the innovation to spread across a number of firms, industries, and so on. So in some sense, this the patent also give us an information about the knowledge base that is in the region, but also the capability of the knowledge to travel across the region and be spread among a number of firms. Okay, so these are the three main dimensions that we focused on. And I will start with the first one, which is the embeddedness one. So what type of data we have used? So we have focused on all the R&D projects that have been funded by UKRI and that involved both private and public institutions. From this huge database called Gateway to Research, we have extracted information about the type of organization. So we have looked whether these are led by businesses or public research centers. We have looked at the type of funding that this organization have received, the value of the grants, and then we have extracted all the information on partners and collaborators. So what have we done with this data? So as James mentioned, we have used to develop a number of visualizations that allow us to capture very quickly what is happening in terms of, for instance, links, in terms of partnerships, and so on. So, and I got here one example of this visualization. You can find all these in the app that is part of the outputs of the ODA pilot. And what we have here is, for instance, the indicator that we call the local R&D collaboration intensity, which tell us the percentage of projects led by a South Yorkshire firm with a local partner. And in what we can see is that, of course, the urban areas are characterized by high percentages of this type of collaborations, but there are a large number of areas where not much is happening or very little is happening. And if we focus on the external R&D collaboration intensity, which is in this screenshot from the app, you can see that, again, we do have some collaboration with the external partners, but this is mostly concentrated in urban areas. And what is interesting, if we look at these two screenshots on the same screen, is that areas where there is some collaboration with the local partners do not seem to have then some collaborator externally. So, what is this telling us? Well, we do know that basically there is definitely a certain amount of connections among local innovators, and there is definitely a certain amount of connections with external partners. What we find is that collaboration with external partners is common in urban areas, but not so much in rural areas. And this is hardly surprising because obviously the urban areas have got the right infrastructure that can support this type of distance collaboration, where obviously broadband matters, capabilities of doing video calls like this one matters, and so on. We have drilled in the data a bit more, and what we can say is that when we talk of external partners, well, we know that tend to be mostly national partners. So clearly this is a good sign because it tells us that there is a certain amount of embeddedness with the national innovation systems in other areas of the country. But at the same time, it's also telling us that the South Yorkshire innovators are not very well connected in the global value chains where basically innovation happens. And so this is something that in some sense needs to be reflected upon, because while this is a good thing, can be also a possible weakness of the regional innovation system in South Yorkshire. Right, so always talking about embeddedness, we have started to look at the value of the grants, and we have done so in comparative terms. So we have compared the performance of South Yorkshire with Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire, so the big neighbors that we have. Now, what is clear is that South Yorkshire is good at attracting larger grants. So if you look at the slides, we are rather well in attracting funds above the 500K threshold, which is a good thing to have. I mean, this is undeniable. Now, what is interesting is that universities, the two universities appear like as partners in this type of R&D grants. And there is still, though, a lot of activities happening with grants from Innovate UK that tend to be mostly applied grants working on applied research. And this is telling us that there is a good mix of blue sky and applied research in the region, which is another element of strength that has been highlighted by research on local innovation system. Generally speaking, if we look at the data on grants, universities play an important role in the regions, and this is hardly surprising. So we know that universities boost the innovation rates via the number of R&D collaboration, but also through the by increasing the number of patents that are assigned to South Yorkshire innovators. Okay, so second element, second part of our study is focused on the labor market, and we have looked first at the online job postings data that are collected by Burning Glass. And this database covers a very long period, starts in 2012 up to 2022. Now, this data gives us information about the demand for jobs from companies. The second database that we have used is the quarterly labor force survey that focuses on the supply, in some sense. It's the existing workforce in the region and covers the period from 2017 to 2022. Now, what we have done, we have basically split the jobs that are available in the region into groups. The innovative jobs that collect the creative and STEM jobs, and the non-innovative jobs, so which would be all the rest. Now, the definition of creative and STEM jobs comes from a report from Nesta, which is the innovation think tank based in London, which is an accepted way of classifying the jobs that can be defined as innovative. So what do we find when we go and drill into this data? Okay, so first of all, if we look at job postings, what we can, and we consider the time series, so we can see that the region per se has got a share of online job posting in innovative occupations that ranges between 12% and 16%. What is interesting, though, is that this share is increasing up to 2017 and then slightly starts to decrease. And there's a discussion, and my colleague Jessie probably can elaborate more. There's a discussion whether this is an actual fall in the demand for jobs, or it's rather a problem with the way the company collects data, and probably there may be a change in the way they collect the data around that time. So this is something that needs to be treated very cautiously in our view. If we look at the geographical spread across the region, Sheffield has got the largest concentration of job postings in innovative occupation. I don't think that there is any surprise on this one. And this is followed by Doncaster and then Barnsley, with Rotterdam being the last one. Now, in terms of share of innovative versus non-innovative jobs, we have here a plot of the shares between split by month. So this is actually very detailed. And I think what is interesting to see is that the share of innovative jobs follows more or less, apart from the area around the end of 2019. Anyway, it follows more or less the same pattern as the shares of the non-innovative jobs. And this is actually something that hints at the fact that this dip after 2017 may not be simply due to something structural or to a decrease in demand just for innovative jobs, but there may be something else happening at the moment of data collection. If we look at the geographical spread, we can see that the growth of jobs, innovative jobs, is concentrated in Sheffield. And we can see this huge spike at the end of 2021, which is basically happening only in Sheffield. And it is well above what happened, for instance, in 2017, around March or June. What I think is though interesting of this data on the demand for innovative jobs is where these jobs sit in terms of industry. And what we see is that, okay, we do have a large share coming from engineering, which probably is hardly surprising given the economic history of the region. But what is interesting is that the biggest share is in something computers, ICT, which is an interesting sector because it collects a number of SIC codes, so a number of industries. And it's also a sector where it is very easy to be innovative in some sense, because you don't have large entry costs into the sector. You can easily develop an app and build a business model and around this app and develop new startups. So what I'm trying to say is that computers we associate to innovation, but also the type of innovation that is not the traditional technological one that we associate to patents. Advertising and marketing is also an interesting one, because obviously this is not a sector per se, it's more of a function across a number of industries, but it's also telling us that it's that in some sense the demand for job is in areas where the entry costs are very low. So I think this is an interesting piece of information on where innovation is happening in the region. Right, so comparatives. So we have compared the performance of Sheffield with other cities like Manchester and Leeds. And what we can see is that Sheffield, even if it's scoring rather well in the context of the region, it's not performing that great if compared to Manchester and Leeds. And not only the share is much smaller, because we have 18%, it's the share of job postings in innovative occupations in Sheffield. But what is interesting is that even the salary is low, and we can look here at on the right-hand side. Here you can see that the salary in South Yorkshire is much lower in innovative occupations than, for instance, what we get in West Yorkshire. And this, I think, is something that should be another piece of information that we should all reflect upon, in the sense that we should understand why, for jobs that presumably are comparable, the salary is still that low. Okay, so now let's talk about the third dimension that we were interested on, that we have focused on, which is the quantity and quality of the innovation output. And here we have focused on patents as the big indicator of innovation. Importantly, and this probably refers to what John was saying at the beginning, patents capture only a small fraction of what can be considered innovation. So this is something that we need to be very much aware. And these are the innovations that tend to be mostly technological, that pass the certain threshold of novelties as defined by the patent office. So there are a lot of caveats that come with the use of this data. At the same time, this is probably the only high quality data on innovation that we have. And so again, this is something that we need to bear in mind when we try to understand what these data are telling us. So what is it that we have found? Well, first of all, the number of patents granted to South Yorkshire firms is much lower than what we observe in the neighboring regions. And there is some evidence of some specialization among the 4 cities that form South Yorkshire. And we can see that Doncaster is specialized in construction, Rotherham in mechanical engineers, and Sheffield takes basically is specialized in physics, chemistry, and metallurgy. And there is some evidence that though innovation in transport is basically spread across the whole region. Now, what do we know about these patents? So what we have looked at is first of all, their originality. Now, originality is calculated as the extent to which a patent relies on previous knowledge for its development. And this is captured by the backward citations. So what we have here is a plot that tries to capture the relationship between patents number and the originality of these patents. And if we have a highly original patents, we are in the blue type of area, while if the patents are not very original, we are more into the purple lilac, I think, type of area. So what happens is that we can see that nicely in our region, we have a lot of blue, some purple even. So this is telling us that clearly the patents are original. So the patenting activity in South Yorkshire is interesting, is original in the sense that it tends to probably work at the frontier of their field. At the same time, we need to, the numbers tend to be not too high in terms of absolute levels of patents. So I think this is something that probably we can discuss, because it seems to me that there is definitely work happening in terms of innovation and attempt to patent. But clearly, it's not some sort of continuous activity of the type that you would associate to large companies that patent continuously. So we don't have large numbers that get churned across the region. Now, what is really interesting is in the next screen, which looks at something else, which is the forward citations. Now, for this sort of visualization, we have decided to take a comparative approach in the sense that we wanted to compare what's happening in our region with the usual areas of West Yorkshire and Greater Manchester. Now, and here we are focused on forward citations. So how much patents from quote or cite the patents that have been assigned to South Yorkshire innovators. Well, what we find is that the pictures is not dramatically different in some sense across the 3 regions. So we do have some areas where there's a large number of forward citations, and this is the darker red areas around Rotherham. There is another area at the edge of the region. But what we can see is that Leeds and York perform slightly better. This is a fact. So we are rather okay if we look at what is happening in Manchester, but not so much if we look at the other two areas. So now, again, this is based on forward citation, which for me is an indicator of how well the knowledge produced by knowledge is spread. And clearly, there is some spread, okay? There's some diffusion, but it's not too much, in the sense that it's not penetrating all the corners of the region. And probably we are fine if we compare ourselves to Manchester, but I think the question is it really a good thing? Should we do something to increase the diffusion of knowledge associated to the patents? Okay, so again, drilling the data. Well, I think one of the big questions, and this is probably something that should be really discussed, is obviously patents don't capture all forms of innovation. We do know from the R&D collaborative project that R&D happens in the region, and that the region is very good at attracting large grants. So the question is, where is this innovative output? Obviously, it's probably in processes, could be in activities and industries that do not use a patent as the standard way to protect their intellectual property. So at this point, our suggestion is it sure that the patents capture everything? It could be that most innovations are there, but are not patented for a number of reasons. And there is a huge literature that tells us that some companies prefer not to patent. They rather rely on other ways to protect the IP. And while it's fine from a business perspective, obviously creates us a problem as analysts because there is no way to track innovation, but at the same time creates problem also to the policymaker, because obviously there's no way to track the diffusion of knowledge. We know that there is definitely research activity at the frontier of the fields in the area around the AMRC. We haven't found too much evidence of patenting in fields like ICT and climate change technologies. So we do have a problem in this area, but again, this is part of the discussion. Is it a problem or it is not? And then there is obviously the problem of the diffusion of knowledge, which is really what the data, what our findings on forward citation is telling us. So, we do have a number of policy implications. We obviously think that it would be a good thing to increase the R&D collaboration and increase the range of partners. In particular, we think that it would be a good idea to start helping South Yorkshire innovators to connect to the big global value chains. We think that we should increase at least patenting activities in new technologies related to climate change. And we know that there is some investment that shows that this may happen. And then, of course, we think that ICT is another opportunity there. But again, I mean, ICT is a bit of a difficult one because it's a type of industry where patenting is not a common choice. There are other ways to protect the IP. There is also a cultural issue that basically works in this field, feels that what they produce should be open to everybody. So, I mean, it's a bit more difficult field to work with. So, third policy conclusion, we think that the model of the AMRC is an interesting one, works well in the sense that it's producing the type of patents that we want, and is also helping the diffusion of the knowledge, at least in that area. So the question is, would it make sense for the region to have a new cluster of research and excellence along this area? And should the two universities involved in this development across around other parts of the region? And last but not the least, we think that there should be some initial thinking about how to align innovation policy to labor market policies. So if we wanted to boost innovation, but then we only capture innovation through patents, then I think we need also to pay attention that patenting happens in industries where jobs in innovative occupation are not created. So these are industries that may be capital intensive, where they use a different business model, which may not lead to the creation of a large number of new jobs in innovative industries. So I think we should, I mean, this is open for discussion, but I think it's important that there is some thinking about how the two type of policies should work together. And finally, from a researcher point of view, clearly, we think that there is a need to identify better ways to track innovation within the region. Of course, patents are the well-established indicator, but I think that there should be an effort to capture these innovations that are not there, that are produced in industries where patenting is not common, where basically IP is protected in other ways, and so on. And I'll stop here. And thank you very much. And any questions? I'll pass it to John, who is the chair.
Yeah, thank you, Vanya. That was excellent. Thank you so much for showing the slides and walking us through the research and some of the key points. We've had a couple of questions on the chat, but if people do have questions, please raise your hand and I will get to grips with Zoom again and try and field them. But one question that we've had in the chat, Vanya, Jesse, and Enrico, is really a conceptual one. So is the national innovation system just the aggregate of local innovation systems, or does it have distinct capabilities? So I suppose sort of the idea that it is the national system sort of a set of building blocks of local areas, or is there something sort of distinctive coming out? I don't know if who wants to answer that or has a view on that.
I could take a crack at it.
Excellent, thanks you, Jess.
So yeah, that's actually a really interesting question. I think a question that's potentially become more interesting in the wake of the pandemic here. So if we think about what innovation systems look like before the pandemic, while this is true, so certainly if you set up so for example, if you set up a software company in Sheffield, you can probably use financiers and lawyers from London to do the job. But that doesn't tend to happen, surprisingly. So we still see these innovative clusters where not only the primary innovators are taking place, so think the finance industry in London or Silicon Valley in California. So you don't just have primary innovators there, you also have the whole support network clustering in these areas. So historically, it seems to be that the localness of these innovation systems really matters as a separate component from the broader country. Now, whether or not that's changed following the pandemic, so we've gotten much better at remote working, everybody is more used to remote working, so we might see a little bit more of this. So maybe now, if you're a software developer, it actually makes sense to set up in a place like Sheffield or further north and still use the resources that are available to you in London. But this is something that we'll have to wait and see. These forces tend to be very strong, these businesses wanting to be local to one another. So my guess is we're still going to see that the distinct locality of businesses really matters.
Thanks, Jesse. I'm just going to skip forward in terms of questions to one from Justin, and I'll try and read this verbatim because there's a good sense of this feeling like it comes from the heart here. The presentation outlined by Vanya gave a sense of the sectors and industries in terms of labour market. And have you looked at this in terms of the outputs, so patents and embeddedness and collaboration too? So in terms of sort of the labour market linkages there.
No, not yet. I mean, in the sense that this is definitely something that we wanted to do if we are allowed to continue to work once if the ODA moves on from the pilot stage. Now, this is actually something that we wanted to work on. So basically, what we wanted to do is to map these the industries where innovative jobs are created to the data on a patent and see basically if there is a connection there in terms and an overlap. I think there may be some technical issue though, because the data, the industries don't exactly overlap in terms of classification with what you have in the patents data, but at least we can give a shot. Okay, Jesse, Enrico, if I'm saying something that you don't agree with, please don't worry. Step in.
And I just wanted to add on that exactly. Patents are usually measure the technological class level, so they look at the type of technology or invention that is being patented, and this is not easily measurable and linkable to instead industrial classification or occupations at which we see the job posting and the industry data. So there might be the challenge there.
All right. Thank you, Vanya. Thank you, Enrico. Another conversation that has ended in SIC codes are not fit for purpose. Tim has asked on the chat, the presentation had a very strong focus on original innovation rather than the adoption or innovation adoption, which can potentially have a much broader and more rapid transformative effect across organizations. So I suppose there's a comment around innovation adoption and how that could be sort of explored.
Okay, I think for this probably Enrico's got a better idea, because I'm not sure we haven't really considered adoption at all, I think.
Yeah, so in theory, patents are, inventions are patented exactly because they want to be, the owner of the patent wants to exploit them in a commercial way most of the times. So in that case, what we see patented sometimes might not be at the frontier of the knowledge and innovation capability, but this might be something that could be potentially commercially exploited. So in that sense, patents could be a good proxy for that. But we agree that there is a lot of innovation going on which cannot be tracked and measured by patents. We try to do something about that by looking, for instance, at the grants provided by Innovate UK. So Innovate UK is the UK agency meant exactly to fund R&D innovation, not just R&D research and development, but innovation adoption in businesses. And we have measures about the grants which from Innovate UK, which have been granted to businesses based in South Yorkshire. And as Vanya was saying before, the region is doing quite well from that point of view. So we do see a lot of activity in terms of grants and innovation vouchers granted to businesses in South Yorkshire. That's a good sign for the livelihood of the innovation system in Yorkshire.
Fabulous, thank you. And a related question, I'd say. So Lee's noticed that we've got economic researchers and lecturers on providing this. So he's asking a question around displacement, I would guess. So he's asking, so do patents disappear out of the region? So for example, are they linked to an HQ, for example, of a technology park, or for example, so McLaren to Woking is the example provided.
I'm not sure disappearing is the right term. I mean, I think the problem with patents is that a lot of industries have different attitudes towards patents. So basically, some industries favor patents as such, as the key way to protect their IP. Some industries decided that they don't need it in some sense. So for instance, if you look at pharmaceutical, then basically, yes, you use patents literally every day to protect your IP. So you find an application for a patent every day at the IPO. I think what this is telling us is more about the changing industrial structure in some sense of the region. And I think that we in some sense the traditional manufacturing sectors that we associate to patents are obviously either leaving or basically changing location. And what we see here is that there may be a replacement with other sectors and industries that use different ways to protect the IP. Don't know if Jess and Rico want to add something, but I personally see more this as an issue with industrial structure, and that's all. But we always need to start from patents. We cannot simply do innovation without considering what is happening with patents.
I mean, that's a good point. From a data point of view, what we observe is not just a single owner for patents. Most of the times we see and we observe co-owners, so multiple organizations that are jointly owning a specific invention. In that case, if you think about headquarters subsidiaries, most of the times headquarters are always listed as co-owners, but very frequently, if an invention is being invented as a specific subsidiary of an headquarter, even the subsidiary will be part of the co-ownership list. So it is true that we might see spikes in the distribution, the spatial distribution of patents, especially where we have a quarter of businesses, definitely. But at the same time, if an invention comes from a specific subsidiary, we should be able to observe that. Related to that, we're able also to look at the location of inventors. So patents list as well the inventors of the inventions, and for them we know exactly where they live. And based on where they live, we can exactly have an idea of where the invention is took place, basically, before being patented.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Thank you. That yeah, I think the data point is really interesting, and I really appreciate the question, because I think it's always important to consider that leakage or displacement, but it's sometimes how the data works. Another question here was just around how level of collaboration compares with other regions. So the comment sort of highlighted that one of the slides had sort of the relative size of grants received rather than sort of that absolute level, and just whether that was sort of apparent within the work, really.
My recollection is that it's more or less the same as what we observe with patents. So basically, clearly, there's much more collaboration with external partners in West Yorkshire and in the Greater Manchester area. I think in terms of local connections, basically these are more or less the same. It's more or less equivalent across the three regions. So I think that in some sense, given the number of collaborations, South Yorkshire is doing very well in attracting the levels of grants that they managed to attract.
Fabulous. So I am just very conscious of time. If anyone has any last sort of burning questions, but I'm the link is available within the chat. The link is available on the slide that is presented. If you have further questions, please get in touch with myself, James, or the academic team leading on this. As Vanya alluded to, there is hopefully a next stage for this where we can sort of really look in detail at this, and we hopefully should be able to provide further detail on that over the coming weeks. But I wanted to thank Vanya, Jesse, and Enrico for the work, but also for the presentation today. Thank you. There's a virtual round of applause going on at the moment, so please sort of soak that in and enjoy that for the rest of the day. There are other webinars being undertaken, and there'll be a reminder email about that, or probably also a reminder LinkedIn post and Twitter post as well at some point. Thank you all for attending. Thank you so much for the questions. Really insightful. If anyone has any further comments or questions, as always, please get in touch. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.